Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is part B of the second lecture on Descriptive Statistics and Islamic Approach. This lecture is about how whenever we do rankings of different things, this depends on subjective choices and on the purpose of the ranking, but because this is not mentioned, people get the impression that the rankings are objective. Before we start the lecture, we want to take a brief moment to discuss the importance of reading. The message of the Quran starts with Iqra, the order to read. Actually, all knowledge that we have comes from life experience. We only have one life to live, so we can only get one life of experience unless we borrow from the experience of others. So books are the best place from which we can get access to life experiences of others. There are millions of books which give us the fruits of millions of lives. So you cannot read all books, so it's very essential to be selective. As just an example, if there are 100 books, 90 of them would be useless for us. But even if the 10 that are useful, that's too much for us to read. Maybe you can read only one book in your lifetime. So for this purpose, it's very important to have a teacher or a mentor or a guide who can select from his own experience the best of hundreds of books and articles. So one of the jobs of the teacher is to filter the bad, prevent the student from reading unnecessary stuff, as well as guiding him to the good stuff. So the purpose of this lecture is to prepare the student to read an article by Malcolm Gladwell called The Order of Things. We will provide a simplified description of what he does to enable the student to understand the original article. And the basic goal of the entire lecture is to show that whenever we do a ranking, this involves mixing subjective value judgments with the objective factors which are being measured. And so this, when the ranking is presented as an objective fact, this is a deception, because within the objective facts there are values which are mixed in. The values come from purpose, and this connection is not clear and not obvious, and it is not made by the people who are doing the rankings, so they do not know of the subjectivity involved in ranking. So like Gladwell, we start with the illustrative examples of luxury cars. So let's say that there are 3 luxury cars which we are looking at. These are Porsche, Lotus and Chevrolet, and there are 3 dimensions on which we are going to rank them. One is the appearance of the car, how good it looks, stylish, and the other is the engine, and the third is the price. And suppose that the rankings are such that the Porsche has the best engine, the Lotus has the best appearance, and the Chevrolet has the best price. So some numbers which give percentage rankings of each of these 3 cars in each of these 3 dimensions are presented in the table. So the Chevrolet is best according to price, Porsche is best according to engine, and Lotus is best on appearance. So now how can we find a way to objectively rank them and decide which car is the best of all 3? The simple answer is that we cannot. It is impossible to find an objective ranking when there are multiple dimensions. You can find an objective ranking only if there is only one dimension. If it's only price, then we can find the cheapest car. If it's only style, then maybe we can find the most beautiful looking car, although because of the subjectivity of this, there might be differences of opinion. If it is the power of engine, then maybe it is possible to find the single measure which captures this power and gives us a ranking. So the ranking cannot be done unless there is only one factor. So to illustrate how rankings depend on subjective value judgments, we look at the example of the C&D editors. This is not exactly according to the book and not according to reality. We're just making simplifications to make it easy to understand. So the C&D editors are enthusiastic about cars, so they don't care much about price, and they are more interested in the internal characteristics of the engine than in the external appearances. So with this kind of judgment, they give 40% weight to appearance, 50% weight to the engine, and 10% to the price. And when you do the ranking according to these weights, you come out with Porsche having 72, Lotus having 73, and Chevrolet having 54. And so basically the conclusion is that the Porsche and Lotus are nearly the same, while Chevrolet is much inferior. And it appears as if this is an objective judgment, and in fact the article presents it as an objective classification, as a ranking which is objective. It doesn't show the article doesn't explain that this is a subjective judgment. Malcolm Gladwell says that this ranking is not good because they have put so much weight on the engine, but if we look at luxury cars, then we know that luxury cars owners prefer appearances a lot more. So suppose we change the ranking to put 60% weight on the appearance. Then what happens? This time the 30% on engine and only 10% of price, because luxury car owners are possibly wealthy and so they don't care too much about price. So in this case, Lotus comes out with 75, much higher than Porsche at 66, and both of them are better than Chevrolet, which is the worst, the bottom car. But suppose we consider a person who has a limited budget, but he is very much fond of luxury. So what he is looking for is some car which comes into the luxury car status and he can afford. So in this case, he will put a high weighting on price, 50%. Appearance also matters to him a lot, 30%. And engine is good for all luxury cars, so he doesn't put that much weight on that, and he gives it a 20%. So with this ranking, the Chevrolet comes out on top, 70. Lotus comes close with 68, and Porsche is the worst. So depending on the subject, this is what subjective means. The person who wants to buy, the ranking can be completely different. So what do we learn from this? First of all, the rankings are arbitrary and they depend very strongly on the weights. The weights are dependent on values, preferences, the purpose for which we are buying. Now, Malcolm Gladwell concludes that you can do objective rankings only if there is one factor. This is a correct conclusion of Malcolm Gladwell. But he makes a mistake in the article. He says that if the cars were homogeneous, if they were all similar to each other, then the rankings would work fine. But this is wrong. Actually, if you have multidimensional factors, rankings work correctly only if the cars are ranked the same on all of the factors. That is, if you have two cars A and B, A is better than B on each of the factors involved, then there is no difficulty with having multidimensional rankings. But if the cars are different according to different factors, then regardless of whether they are homogeneous or heterogeneous, you will get into trouble because the ranking will depend on the weights, and the weights depend on values which have not been specified. So what weight we attach to different factor depends on the purpose for which we want to drive the car. It also depends on our tastes. So if I want to use a car to drive to work every day, I will have different kind of preferences. If I want to use a car that goes fast and I don't care about fuel economy, that will be a different car. If I'm budget minded and I want fuel economy, or if I care about appearances and I want a flashy car, or I want a solid, sturdy, reliably engineered car and don't care much about appearances, all of these different kinds of personalities, different kinds of values, different kinds of purposes will dramatically affect the rankings of the car. So it is really obvious that we cannot reduce the quality of car to a single number. So then actually how would people go about purchasing car? Normally they would set a budget for the car, and then they would look in this budget for different kinds of cars which match our preferences. Interestingly, it's not that we go in having some preference. Rather, by looking at what's out there, we start developing an idea of what is available, and then this shapes our choice. So it's the exploration which also determines. So there's no um, given ranking from the first, and it's not an issue when we make choices. It's not a question of reducing the car to a particular number. Many different factors are involved, and they are subjectively weighed in our minds and hearts. So then there is a question of meta question, which is important. Why, when this is so obvious that you can't measure the quality of car by a single number, why are we trying to do this? Why do people try to reduce numbers, cars to numbers, reduce intelligence to numbers, reduce many things which are not really measurable and which are qualitative to numbers? So this has to do with the philosophical trends in the theory of knowledge which took place over the past few centuries, but particularly came to a head with logical positivism in 20th century. And the idea is that knowledge only is of facts, and facts are things which you can observe and you can measure. There is the famous dictum of Lord Kelvin that you can know something only if you can measure it. If you can't measure it, then your knowledge is not very good. So this idea of trying to measure everything has been very harmful. It has lost, there is lots of qualitative knowledge, subjective knowledge, contextual knowledge, emotional and experiential knowledge, and spiritual knowledge. All of this has been dropped from the knowledge, and that has led to impoverished lives, people who don't know what life is about, how to seek happiness, how to do. Basically, life is about things which can't be measured and um, which can't be seen because they have to do with qualities of the heart. So this is the real knowledge, but this is not allowed in the framework which the West calls knowledge. And so considering the larger framework is essential to break out of the boxes which have been created by Western conceptions of knowledge. And it is only after breaking out of these boxes that we can relate our education to our life experience, which is the essential part to give meaning to what we learn.